Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about supply and demand. This is basically a visual representation of what a market looks like. Don't get intimidated. We're not going to be doing any math because math is bad. Okay. Now, when we're talking about supply and demand, think in the mind of the buyer and the seller. When you're thinking about demand, it's all about buyers and consumers. When you're talking about supply, it's all about sellers and producers and how they think in their mind when they're engaged in a transaction. Remember that buyers have a goal, get everything for zero. Sellers have a goal, get everything for infinite. And in the middle is a price. The price develops, and that is known in economics as equilibrium. And we're trying to find out where equilibrium is and what makes it move around. Okay. Now, a supply and demand graph has a simple goal, that is to show the relationship between how much a good or service is available and how much consumers want that good or service. Okay. That's a market right there. Now, a supply and demand graph has an x and y axis. And of course, at that intersection of the x and y axis is zero. Then going up that y axis is an increase, and going across the x axis is also an increase. So this is zero, this is increase, that is increase. Okay. Now, when you have a supply and demand graph, understand you must label everything. If you do not label everything, I will simply give it a zero. I won't even look at it if it is not labeled correctly. It is super important to pay attention to detail here. Label absolutely everything. That means label the axes, label the curves, and label equilibrium every time. There is no exception to this rule. It is absolute. Okay. So let's start with the idea of labeling the axes. What are the y and x axis in this case? Y is price. Price is vertical. So it starts at zero and price will go up. These are arbitrary numbers. They're not necessarily always 2, 4, 6, 8. It can be by pennies. It could be by billions of dollars. But we understand that this axis, the y axis, goes from zero and increases in price as we go upwards. The y axis is quantity. All right. It is going to be quantity supplied and quantity demanded. And we'll talk about that later. But this simply means quantity. And of course, quantity increases going from left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is an arbitrary number. It could be zero point 0.1, zero point 0.2, zero point 0.3, 0.4, zero point 0.5. It could be 1 million, 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion, 5 billion. Okay. So price here, quantity. So what do you do when you label it? You mind your P's and Q's all the time. See what I did there? P's and Q's. Is a P and a Q acceptable? Absolutely. You don't need to write out price and quantity, but know that price is here, quantity is here, and you must label your P's and your Q's. This is a demand curve. If you take economics in college, you will notice that it is usually actually kind of bowed. And in here, we're not going to worry about that. This demand curve always slopes downward. Demand curve always slopes downward. Demand curve always slopes downward. Okay. Notice I have a D here. D is for demand. You don't need to put demand. You can just put D. Whenever I see D, I know that is a demand curve and that it is sloping downward. I also know this, that a supply curve slopes upward. A supply curve slopes upward. A supply curve slopes upward. And notice that I have S here. Okay. That S stands for supply. Put them together, and we have a standard supply and demand curve. Now, the last thing you will label is equilibrium, and equilibrium will be E. Equilibrium will move when supply and demand shifts. That E is going to start moving around. So you'll have E1, then E2. You'll have D1 and D2 when supply curves shift, and you have S1 and S2 when supply curves shift and demand curve shifts are D1 and D2. Now, equilibrium is simply the price at which producers and consumers agree about how much a good or service should be bought and sold. Cool. I understand that at E, producers are like, yep, that's an acceptable price. I can make some money on that. And consumers are all, yep, that's acceptable. I'm going to be satisfied with that price, even though I want it to be zero. There's the price, there's the quantity. And what we have here is a finished supply and demand graph. Do you have to put P1 and Q1? You do not. Some people actually get help think it helps them because you can kind of see the price shift and move. And so you'll often see people put P1 and P2 as that price shifts and moves. So this right here is a standard supply and demand graph. You have your axes labeled price, quantity. You have your curves, demand, supply. You have equilibrium right there in the middle. All right. Standard supply and demand graph. Know it. Love it.